So the next thing we might want to focus on is thinking about our HTML a little bit more. So what I'm going to want to do here is go ahead and add the date in, add this paragraph here, this quote paragraph, and then we might also want to group our elements or our posts together so that we have one post as an element. And to do that, I'm just going to use a div here. So I'm going to make a new div, class equals post. So I'm just giving it a class just to make it clear what this is, because just by saying div, it's not very clear what it's doing. And this will be one post. And then we'll have another div class post for this second one down here. So let's go ahead and add in a date as well. And for that date, that could really be anything. I'm going to make it another div, class equals date, but that could be a paragraph as well if we wanted it to be. It doesn't really matter in this case. And then another thing we want to do is add in this quote. And I'm just going to make that a paragraph down here. But I'm going to make it slightly different, of course, because I need to style it differently than these paragraphs. So I'm going to say, let's go give it a class called quote. And then while we're here, let's add in our date here, November 23rd, 2015, and save. So if we refresh right now, it's not going to look really close to what we're looking for. We have to change the date quite a bit. We need to change the font size of this H1. Here, let me make them side by side. We need to add in this left border here on the quote. We need to change the color of this, the spacing of this, and then we need to add this HR in. So let's go ahead and start by styling this left border here. So remember, we have the class which we called quote right here. We're going to want to go back to our CSS and select .quote. And then all we need to do is add in border left 5 pixels, and the color is the same as this one. So 5 pixels, solid gray, that shade of gray. And let's save it. And we take a look. Okay, so that's looking close. The only thing you'll notice is that there's some spacing here. And of course, that spacing is between the border, the left border, and the element. So that would be padding that we need to change. So to change the padding, I'm just going to do padding left 5 pixels. And let's refresh. And that looks pretty good. You can see these look identical now, the two quote paragraphs. So next up, we have a few choices. Let's go ahead and tackle the date. So there's a few things. We want to make it all uppercase. We want to change the color. And we want to add this line spacing, or the letter spacing. So I'm going to move this over to the left. Select the date class. That's what we called it. Div class date. So dot date. And while I'm here, let's grab the color, which is this particular shade of blue, and let's just assign color to be that blue and refresh. You can see we're part of the way there. So to make it all uppercase using CSS, you might remember from the selector video, text transform uppercase. And if we refresh, okay, that's looking pretty close. Pretty much the only thing we have left to do is the letter spacing. So we have a bunch of options for letter spacing as far as the size and the units we use, but the property is called letter spacing. And then we can give it a number. So I'm just going to do 10 pixels first to show you. And that gives us 10 pixels between numbers, which is quite a bit and much more than we need. So what I'm actually going to use is another unit called REM. And REM is just like EMs, which are relative to the element that they're nested inside of, except that REMs are not set by the parent element. They're actually set by the root element on the page. So what that means is if I access inside the body 2.0 REM and I set font size to be 2.0 REM and I do that inside of quote as well, they're actually referring to the same font size. Versus if this was EM, it would be setting the body to be twice as big as the parent element, and then the quote, which is inside the body, would be twice as big as this one here. So it's relative. When we add in REM, though, it's referring to the root element. So this is a nice way to basically do proportional fonts without having to worry about what's nested inside of what. So I'm not going to change the font size on the body, but for our date, what we want to do, I'm going to use 0.2 REM. So that's just going to take the normal font size and add a little bit extra spacing between the letters, 0.2 of the font size. So you'll see here we end up with that, which looks just right. It's 0.2. And I'm not expecting you just to know that. I know that it was 0.2 because I wrote it, but if I was doing this from scratch, I would have played around a little bit. And I would have tried 0.5 first, see what that looks like. Okay, that's too big. And you know, it's not an exact science. It just is in this case because I was the one who wrote it. Okay, so we have that done. That looks pretty good. Let's compare these now. Really, all that we're missing, it looks like, aside from the extra content down here, is making this H2 bigger and slightly changing the color. So let's do the color first. We're going to select all H2s. And the color I have right here, just a dark blue. I'm going to set the color. If we refresh, it's really hard to see, but it changed ever so slightly. And then there are two other things. Well, there's one main thing that we'll want to do, which is changing the font size. And I happen to know that this is twice the font size as everything else. So that would be 2.0 REMs. So we just are going to set font size 2.0 REM, save, refresh, and we end up with this. So let's compare them now. And everything looks exactly the same up until this paragraph, which we're missing here, then everything below. So let's go ahead and add in this paragraph. I'm just going to copy the text, but feel free to use whatever text or lorem ipsum that you'd like. And then we'll add in another blog post and see how that looks. So back to the HTML, and I'm just going to add another paragraph at the bottom and paste that in. Okay, so that is our first blog post. If we compare them, they look identical, except for this HR. So that is one thing that we're going to want to add in there, is this HR, which we'll leave until the end.